When we were young, we probably received as much parental advice about friendship as we did anything else. Our parents were concerned with the friends we were hanging out with and what influence they might be having on us, and rightfully so. As a result of that, there's a lot of wisdom, a lot of sound advice, a lot of proverbs about choosing friends, and most of them are worded pretty cleverly so that we could remember those things, because it's important how we choose our friends, what the basis of our friendships are. For instance, someone said some friends bring happiness wherever they go. Other friends bring happiness whenever they go. And we know that's true, right? And so it's wise that we not choose friends from that second group. Some said friends come and go like the waves of the ocean, but a true friend stays like an octopus stuck on your face. I don't know why I like that. It's just the image, I guess, that it makes in my mind. I found some images, actually, pictures of that illustrate real friendship. This first one is a little pathetic, I think. I don't know whether I would prefer to be the man or the dog in that friendship relationship. I guess I would probably choose to be neither of them. That's a little desperate. This next picture takes best friends forever to a new level. I know that's a little twisted. I apologize for that. So we'll end with a much nicer picture of real friendship. This is what best friends are for. Isn't that cute? You had to include that one. And of course, there's all the classic advice about friendship, right? Things that we've heard many times. In fact, I'll start the quote and you finish it for me. Birds of a feather flock together, right? We've all heard that one. How about this one? Show me your friends and I'll show you. No. Show me your friends and I'll show you your future. Maybe I watched too much Dr. Phil, but that's good advice, right? Show me your friends. The friends you hang out with are going to be influential on you, and so they'll determine in large part the kind of person you come to be. So be careful about choosing friends. 1 Corinthians 15 tells us that bad company corrupts good character. So we have to be careful about the friends that we choose. Now, how many of you received that kind of advice from one parent or another as you were growing up? Raise your hands if you've received important advice about choosing friends. Most of us have. Someone said, friends are like the elevator, buttons on an elevator. They will either take you up or they will bring you down. And that is also true. And so we have to be careful about choosing friendship. Now, having said all of that, we have to wonder if Jesus would have taken any of that advice. This morning, we're going to look at a story that teaches us about the kinds of friends that Jesus sometimes chose. And I'll give you a forewarning, they are not the kinds of friends that his mother would have advised. As we continue in our sermon series, Show Me Jesus, we're going to look at Jesus as the friend of sinners today. Our story comes from Luke chapter 5. It's also recorded in Matthew's gospel and in Mark's gospel. It's the story of the call of Matthew to be one of Jesus' disciples, a close companion of his. And it shows us that Jesus seeks out sinners as his friends. Let's look at Matthew 5, verses 27 and 28. Jesus saw a tax collector by the name of Levi sitting at his tax booth. Follow me, Jesus said to him, and Levi got up and left everything and followed him. Jesus even calls moral failures to be his friend. Matthew was one. Matthew was a tax collector. His given name, as we see in the text there, was Levi. That was a name he was given at birth. That means he would have been named after the tribe of Levi, the priestly tribe. They were consecrated, set apart from the rest of Israel to serve a specific purpose. They were to meet the spiritual needs of the rest of the nation. Every male born in that tribe, the tribe of Levi, was expected to grow up and become a priest that would serve either in the temple or in one of the local synagogues. He was also named after, therefore, the forefather of that tribe, Levi, the son of Jacob. And so it's very likely that Matthew was born into the tribe of Levi. And meaning his father would have been a priest, his grandfather would have been a priest, all the grandfathers preceding them would also have been priests. And it would have been the expectation that Levi, when he came of age, would also be a priest because he was of the priestly tribe. But Levi didn't call himself by his given name. Now, Mark's account is very similar to Luke's in naming this tax collector Levi, but Matthew's account gives him a different name. We read in Matthew chapter 9 and verse 9, as Jesus was walking along, he saw a man named Matthew sitting at his tax collector's booth. "Follow me and be my disciple," Jesus said to him. So Matthew got up and followed him. Same story, same man, same exact scene, except his name was changed. This was the autobiographical rendition of this story. It was Matthew telling his own story, and he chose to call himself by Matthew, his chosen name, rather than Levi, his given name. Why? Did he want a new life? Did he prefer to live incognito? There are a lot of theories as to why Levi chose the name Matthew and called himself by that name. Let me offer you this possible scenario. Levi didn't want to be a priest. He chose a different life for himself. He chose a more lucrative career than the priesthood, and so he became a tax collector. He collected taxes from his homeland of Israel for Rome. Tax collectors were seen as traitors by their own people, collaborators with the Roman Empire. They collected taxes from the holy nation of Israel to give that money to the pagan nation of Rome. And so instead of serving God and his people, Levi served Rome. But it gets worse. Tax collectors were often greedy and exploitive. They were permitted to charge whatever tax rate they wanted as long as Rome got their prescribed share. The nation of Rome established a tax rate for every different country, and then they appointed the tax collectors to collect that amount. The tax collectors were given permission to collect more than that and then take the rest of it as their own salary. That it was unopened, unlimited. They could take whatever amount they wanted. They could charge whatever tax rate they wanted, and then they could therefore become as wealthy as they wanted. And it encouraged greed and exploitation. They used the power and the authority of the Roman government to extort excessive amounts of money from their own people. They were seen as profiteers, racketeers, like mafia strongmen who charged some kind of a fee for the local businesses in their neighborhood to protect them from damage to their establishment. And so, instead of serving God and his people, Matthew, Levi, served himself. And he cheated the very people he had been set aside to minister to. So he changed the name that he could not live up to. Perhaps Levi, the Levite, not only turned his back on his calling, but turned his back on his faith as well. He turned out to be a huge disappointment to his family. He became a disgrace to the name he wore, so he changed it. And Matthew became a notable sinner. But Jesus chose him. Jesus wanted him. And this fact explodes a common myth that God hates sinners. It's not true. I met Vince Antonucci several years ago at a preaching summit in Indianapolis. He leads a church in the city of Las Vegas, and their church reaches out to the most sinful people in that city. Vince tells of Christian groups which go to the old Las Vegas strips, and they use the old Las Vegas strip, and they use bullhorns to yell out to all of the people who will frequent that area how sinful they are and where they are going as a result of their sinful lives. Vince tells of one man who carries a big sign. He frequents the strip and he carries the sign, and the letters across the top in bold print are WWJD. And below that acronym are the words not that we would expect, what would Jesus do, but instead these words, who will Jesus destroy? And then there is a list of all the various kinds of sinners that frequent the Las Vegas Strip. This man carries a sign telling all of them that they are going to be in hell. In answer to that kind of Christian witness, the members of Vince's church print flyers that they hand out to people on the strip with the letters WDJL printed across the top in bold, large letters. And below that acronym are the words of explanation, who does Jesus love? And then below that is the same list of sinful people that the sign carrier has on his sign. Vince's church members tell people that God is love and that he loves them. That doesn't mean that God accepts the sins of mankind. But our first message to people ought to be one of love. We must lead with love because Jesus loves sinners. He seeks out, calls out to follow him moral failures. He chooses those who are despised. Matthew was that kind of sinner. He was despised. Tax collectors were among the most hated by Jews in the first century. Twice in the New Testament, they are compared to prostitutes. 8 times in the Gospels, they are called sinners. That's not the Bible's judgment of them. That is a reflection of the cultural thought of the time. That's how people saw tax collectors. They were so despised by religious leaders that they were completely rejected. They were considered unclean, like unbelievers are, and therefore they were not permitted to participate in the worship services. They were also not permitted to testify in court, for they were considered to be dishonest. And their money was not accepted as charity donations because it was considered to be tainted. They were treated as outcasts in every way. And so it would have been a scandal for a rabbi to befriend one of them. And it would have been even more scandalous for a rabbi to choose one as his disciple. But Jesus did. He loved Matthew. When you think you aren't good enough for God to love, you remember this story. And you remember that no one is too sinful to bring to Jesus. No one is too sinful to bring to his church. We may not be much different than those Pharisees if we look down on people who are enslaved by sin. Or we look down on people who we think are not as spiritual as we are, just as the Pharisees did. We must follow the example Jesus gave us. We must stop judging those who don't know him, and we must start loving and serving them. We must welcome them into our church family. They might not know how to act when they first start coming to church, for there is a learning process to becoming a disciple. We can't expect someone who wasn't raised in church to know how to act properly when they attend here. Several years ago, 2 adult sisters began attending our church. They had not been raised as Christians. It wasn't long before they were baptized. They attended church every Sunday morning, but they weren't familiar with all of our worship practices. For example, during communion time, instead of quietly praying and meditating, they would whisper back and forth to each other. This angered an older lady in our church who had been a Christian for many years. Apparently, she had learned a lot more about church etiquette than she had learned about loving like Jesus does. for she shot dirty looks at those sisters. And she asked me to reprimand them. I told her they were infants in Christ, just learning. They were new to church and new to Christianity, and they needed time and patience and understanding to develop. She didn't like my answer. She got angry with me for not being proactive about the problem. I often wonder now if she said something to those sisters because they don't worship here anymore. Neither does the critical lady. I wish she had been more like Jesus, a friend to sinners. I hope we all will. This is just half of Matthew's story. Jesus seeks out the sinner to be his friend. The other half of it is that Jesus hangs out with sinners. We see that as we continue reading where we left off in verse 29 of Luke's gospel. Then Levi held a great banquet for Jesus at his house. A large crowd of tax collectors and others were eating with them. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law complained to his disciples, "Why do you eat and drink with tax collectors and sinners?" It's because Jesus cares about them. At least that was his explanation in answer to this question that they asked. As we see in verse 31, Jesus answered them, "It is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick." Let's go back to that scene. Matthew invites all of his tax collector friends to have this meal, have this celebration with him and Jesus. What kind of party do you think that was? Let me give you a hint. That was not a church fellowship dinner that they were having together. They were not those kinds of people. It tells us that in the text that it was a large crowd of tax collectors and others who had gathered with Jesus. Doesn't that make you wonder who the others were? What kind of people they were? Verse 30 gives us a little insight when the Pharisees asked, "Why do you eat and drink with tax collectors and sinners?" Now, we know we're all sinners, right? But you have to be on the other side of awful for that term to be printed on your name tag at a social function, right? Instead of Rick, it says sinner. Wow, what kind of guy is he? What did he do? Well, that's what they were called at this social function. These were hardcore sinners. Regular sinners wouldn't hang out with tax collectors. The sinners who did were those who were befriended by no one else. They had no one else to turn to find friendship except the lowly tax collectors. In other words, these others were the worst of sinners. The term tax collectors and prostitutes were often spoken in tandem to describe the worst of the worst in Israel. And that's who we find Jesus partying with. It wasn't the church ladies' society who had gathered for that luncheon with Jesus. Here's the point. Jesus cares about sinners. And you know, there's something even more amazing in this story to me than that. And that is, they liked him. We see another example of this in Luke 15, verses 1 and 2, when it says tax collectors and sinners were all crowding around to listen to Jesus. So the Pharisees and the teachers of the law started grumbling, "This man is friendly with sinners. He even eats with them." In both cases, they voiced that concern. Why do you associate with sinners? No rabbi would do that. No Torah teacher would do that. No self-prescribed Messiah would do that. Why are you? The loving Son of God did that. And he explained why. As we saw in verse 31, and we also see also in verse 32, Jesus answered them, "It is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance." Jesus was on a mission of love, a mission to save those who were caught in their sin. He came to give the undeserved to the undeserving. Do you know what that's called? It's called grace. You learn what that means because we are saved by it. Grace offers forgiveness to the penitent. Grace offers pardon to the condemned. Grace offers salvation to the lost. Grace is how we know Matthew. Matthew is not known to us as a moral failure who turned his back on his divine duty and his faith. Instead, we know him as one of Jesus' first disciples. We know him as the author of Jesus' first gospel. And that is because of his relationship with Jesus. Jesus befriended that sinner in order to make him a saint. And so he hopes to do with each one of us. This message of that kind of grace can only be learned if we share it graciously. Did you notice in both Luke 5 and Luke 15 how it tells us that the sinners love to just pack around Jesus, gather around him in large numbers? Why is that? He was so holy and they were so not. I think it's because Jesus didn't make them feel worse. He made them feel loved. Let's learn from Jesus. Let's be a friend to sinners. I fear that for us as Christians, most of us spend so much time with our Christian friends that we don't have any time to befriend a sinner. And if that's the case, then we are more like the Pharisees than we are like Jesus. For Jesus made it a point to spend time with sinners. That was his mission. That was his passion. Joe Aldrich, in a sermon he wrote entitled How to Be Redemptive, told of the time when he and his wife began attending Dallas Theological Seminary. He said, we didn't live in seminary housing. Instead, he said, we chose to live in the red light district of Dallas. He said, if you want to get an introduction to life, that's the place to be. He said, my wife and I made a commitment that we would take out one person or one couple to dinner every week. And boy, did we get an education. But boy, did we have fun. Because people were coming to the Lord left and right. And all we had to do was simply love them and open our home to them. When a sinner won't come to church because they feel they will be treated like an outcast, we must take the church's message to them. That's what Jesus did. He got out of the synagogue and out of the temple and away from the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, and he went to where the sinful people were, and he loved them. He embraced them. He hung out with them, and he invited them to be his followers, and so must we. I hope that Louisville Christian Church is more than just a hotel for saints. I hope this place is a hospital for sinners, a place where sinful people come to find spiritual healing because we love them here. We welcome them here. We want to bring them to Jesus here. Jesus is still calling today to sinful people. But today he does it through us. We have to be open to that. We have to be ready to reach out in love. We have to provide that message that leads with love instead of condemnation. We have to have a love for them like Jesus does. He's calling today, speaking to your heart. If you are not a Christian, he's calling you to come to him and to become his friend, to begin a lifelong and into eternity relationship with him. If you are a Christian, he's calling you and speaking to your heart about your love for others and asking to reach out through you. I want to urge you, whichever category you are in, answer that call.